So recording now. All right. So at this point, right, guys, we wanted to really just kind of finish this up, right? We've kind of got just about all of our material properties on. We want to kind of start to set up the lighting and rendering. One of the things I really quickly wanted to show you, and I was just missing this one little step on the bump map the other day, right? Keep in mind that we did paint this as a default kind of texture, not a 32-bit. When you do create a new texture, right, so if I was to go over to the red here and say we were to create a new texture, you'll see it kind of gives you that prompt, right? So like if I was to maybe go to materials and try to plug something in elsewhere, like say, I'll go to clear coat and I'll just pick, like I say, an image. Where's the image one popping up? There we go. You just move your cursor up and it goes all the way up through here. And we can find image texture. One of the things you'll find is that it will kind of particularly go to shading. You see it kind of bring up the image texture here, right? And that's, of course, also where you can kind of just say new, right? Click on new. And you'll notice that you, of course, can give your resolutions here, but you can also do 32-bit float point, right? That'll create a higher quality texture. You will notice sometimes that bump maps, if you just kind of use the default 8-bit, kind of have this banding and kind of pixelated look to them. So particularly for a bump map, you when you create the new texture, you might just want to do a 32-bit floating point. In this case, I'm just going to get rid of that node because I didn't actually want to add anything there. But I just want to kind of remind you guys that when you actually create the new texture, maybe just pick 32-bit if you're going to do the bump mapping. So what we had last time, remember there's texture paint where you can go paint stuff, but you can go to shading, and that does let you see your shading node for whatever object you're on, right? So remember 4 is object mode, and you can click on these things, right? Boom, boom. There is a quiz also today. What is edge selection tool? 2, right? 2. So remember that when you're ready to take the quiz, and I'll talk about it later on. There's a mini quiz. What is edge selection tool quick shortcut? And that is 2, right? Because we're using industry compatible. Remember, when you click on these objects, you will kind of see that you have the different materials here, right, that you can kind of pick, that little ball right there. So there's the rims texture if we wanted to. And you saw I actually applied a rim texture to that. So I can always kind of go to something else, or I'm going to create a new one later on. But I'm going to go to the tires here. Because you see when you click on these guys, it'll kind of bring up the materials. And what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to just take this tire color map that we have. I actually just want to plug it into the normal section for bump mapping, right? In this case, that way we can maybe just give it a solid color. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go up to here. And this is where, remember, you can always kind of adjust your screen sizes a little bit. Remember these little bars, you can just left drag them to kind of temporarily maximize an area. So remember, this is just the shading menu, and it lets you kind of see your textures and your materials. And there's that pull down here, right? That'll kind of show those as well. So I'm just going to left click. See how there's kind of this little line that connects color here to base color here? So you can just click on that and it unplugs it, right? And then what I can do is I can drag it down to the normal section, right? Now you'll notice it doesn't kind of look that great right now. Part of that is because you need an intervening node in here to really get the better result, right? It's kind of like with that normal maps, right? You kind of need that intervening normal node to give you a lot more control over it. The nice thing is it's really easy to add nodes in Blender. You just go to the add section here, and there's a section called vector, and that's where the normal one is, right? Normal map. There's also bump. So I can click on bump, and you see it gives me this node. Now you'll notice it's cool. You can place it anywhere, but if you put it over the line, you see the line because it's highlighted white, it plugs it in for you. Now this is kind of, I was doing this the last time, right? But the problem is that you want to change this from normal to height. And then you'll actually start to see it properly show up, right? So sometimes it's just that plugs it into a node that you don't want, right? If you want, you can invert this, right? So that the kind of creasing in's a little bit more. And you can kind of see we've got a little bit of that kind of pixelating look to it. That's because of it's not a 32-bit texture, so if you wanted that a little cleaner, which for a tire, if you don't want to, that's okay, right? If you're like, it's fine, it looks decent enough, that's cool, right? It's a small part of our car. But you'll notice that we have this distance control, which can make the bump more or less intense, right? So really, when you go to plug these bump nodes in here, add node, bump, you just want to change the color from being plugged into normal to height, and then it'll respond properly. That was that one little step I was forgetting last week. But distance here, we could type in a smaller number, like say 0.5. maybe even less than that, like 0.3. But still gives us kind of a little bit of actual look of detail, right? Like it's raised or depressed. And then I can just go back up to the color, click on that, and then I can just turn this down to kind of a much darker gray, right? And now we've got a much better looking tire, right? So remember, you can actually paint it as a color map. You could technically just have plugged this into the bump node right from the get-go and painted it directly as a bump map, right? But you'll notice that the texture is already loaded into Blender, and you could switch to different channels, right? So you can actually connect it to different channels on the fly. It's just that certain things like bumps and normal maps usually kind of want this intervening node that gives you some of these extra controls right there. In particular, things like the distance controls or the strength controls are great because they allow you to kind of control the intensity, right, of the bump or normal map. But you do also have to remember to kind of plug into the right one. Sometimes it plugs it into one that it's not giving the correct results. Sometimes just try switching to height, right, and that actually gives you a much better result for that bump map. There we go. And you see, even if we didn't use kind of a 32-bit, it'll still actually look pretty convincing as a tire. It'll give it kind of some natural noise. But if you did want a much cleaner bump map, I'd say when you create the texture from scratch, check that little 32-bit float option on when you get to the create image texture, which I kind of redid a show off again today here, just so you had that. Now, in this case, what I want to do is I actually want to kind of make the roof a different color, right? So I'm going to select the roof here, and I'm going to go to New, right? So we can create a new material, and we can give this a name. We can call this, I'm going to call this roof right now, but we can change it. Now, in this case, I don't really want this to be terribly shiny, right? I want this to be much more of a matte effect. I also kind of want it to have a bit of kind of that matte gray look. So, of course, I can go to the base color. Now, keep in mind that you have these controls right here, too, as well, right? See, there's the roof material. You'll see them there, right? Get out of there. So you can actually control them over here if you find it a little easier to do that. It's just that when you want to kind of put intervening nodes in here after the fact, that's where having the shader tree area here is really, really cool. And Blender's version of this is quite user-friendly. So in this case, I'm going to go back to base color, and I want to give that kind of that darker grayish color, right? Maybe almost a black. Now in this case, you see how it's got a bit of shininess to it? That's fine, right? We don't want a metallic. We can turn the roughness down to make it more shiny, but see how that's getting a little too shiny? I want it to be a pretty matte surface, but have a bit of specularity. So it's one of those things where we can, of course, just play with the default specular controls and a little bit of the roughness. And you see how we can kind of give it that matte look to, it's got a bit of shininess to it, right? You can kind of see it a little bit there, but it's very subtle. It's much more like what you look at these computers, right? You notice how they kind of have that slight shininess to them, but it's kind of this very matte or diffuse shininess. That's what roughness controls, right? So specular is really just controlling the intensity of the specular, whereas roughness is controlling it's kind of how much it spreads over the surface, right? So if I turn that roughness back down, see how it becomes highly reflective. But you notice how if we turn specular down with low roughness, it's still kind of reflective, but it's less intense, right? So roughness is a big control for you. In fact, roughness is in many ways probably one of the more important controls for making your metals and plastics look more matte or shiny. So in this case, we just kind of wanted to have a kind of cool little matte look for those, right? Now the cool thing is I can go to the hood, and I can change this to roof. And then I can go to the trunk, and I could click on this guy right here and change that to roof, right? And so it's very easy to use one material on all of them, right? So that you can quickly and easily start to get something more dynamic, right? So kind of cool there. And now what we want to do is we want to start to get maybe some window, right? So I'm going to select those. And in this case, all the windows are selected, and that's fine. You could always kind of have these separated out. You might want to put like that same kind of roof material on the inner stuff in the car, right? So I might go in here and just kind of quickly switch those to roof. And so what's cool is you notice how you can actually put your own different, and you could create a totally different one as well, right? So like in this case, I might even go about maybe having a seat one, right? So remember, you select it, and if it's already got a material, you just click on this new page one and say, hey, there's roof 2, and I'm going to call this seats, right? There we go. And we could always change this to have like no specularity and no roughness, and maybe give it a slightly kind of lighter color, just to give it a bit of variation, right? All right. But you see how it's easy to just apply an existing material to multiple objects, right? Once you've created a material, you can keep reusing that one on different objects if you want to. And it's as easy as just selecting the object and then switching it, right? That's what that little pull down's for. Or even making a new one. You can get these controls here as well. So there's new material there. You have your pick, like your list right there. And this is actually one of those things, once again, if you've spent time with Maya, some of you guys spent time with Maya this last year, Blender's honestly just more, it's got kind of the same horsepower in terms of having a full nodal network that you can build complicated shaders with and materials. It's got a powerful material itself that has emission and metallic all built in there. But the actual interface is just kind of easier. You know what I mean? It's just a little easier just to swap and switch things pretty easily. So in this case, I'm going to create a new material for the windows. So I'm going to go new. And we'll call this windows. There we go. And in this case, you can see that there's windows. We can see it's right over here as well. And what we want to do is we want to start to play with things like transmission, as well as kind of the alpha, right? Let's see here what's going on. There we go. The alpha should be all the way up. I'm trying to remember, there's like another control for this. Let's see. Okay, yeah. So for the material, if we go down to the settings section here, what we can do is, I think it's alpha blend. There we go. What you could do is you see how you can kind of get, actually it might not be alpha blend. Let's see here. I think it's alpha clip. Or, no, I think it's alpha blend. Let's do it for both though. Let's see here. I just have to turn some shader controls up. We're also getting a bit of reflection there as well. But sometimes you actually want to go in here and kind of just go to the settings section once you start playing with transmission and alpha, right? There we go. So you turn alpha down, you turn transmission up. I think that one's fine there. Yeah. But you might need to switch from opaque to alpha blend, right? To really start to see that in real-time viewport. So that's how you can start to get transparency, right? Transmission's a big part of that. But so is turning down your alpha as well. And particularly if you wanted to plug in transparency maps, usually plug it into the alpha channel itself. You can actually tell it to use screen space reflections if you want to, as well as refraction depth, so it can start to bend kind of a little bit of that light going through there as well. We're not going to worry about this being too insane for transparency. We just want to kind of have it be fundamental. And I really feel like I want it to be a little less transparent, so we'll kind of maybe play with these a little bit. And of course, you can give it a color. So we can go to base color here, and you see how you can kind of tint it by playing with that base color. And so we could easily just kind of play with this to kind of get more and more of it to look like kind of glass. Bring the roughness down so we get a little more reflection in there. Bring specular up so we can get a little more reflection in there. And you'll notice that just kind of with some of these sliders here, we can start to get these other effects, right? So the biggest thing you're going to start to see with things like transparency is transmission and alpha, and how those can kind of control together the transparency. Usually you have to go to settings to make sure to kind of have the blend mode proper, particularly if you want to see it in Eevee. And then, things like reflection properties still there. Glass tends to be pretty reflective. And color, right? And that could tint it. So now you can start to see we're getting kind of basically a car setup, right? And it's looking pretty good directly in Eevee. At this point, what we want to start to do is kind of set up the environment for it. So I'm going to go back to modeling really quick. And I want to create a floor. So I'm actually going to go 4 for object mode. And I'm just going to go to add. Mesh, and I'm just going to go to plane. R for scale, right? And then middle mouse button because you can uniformly scale it up. And we want to just create a floor for this to rest on. And I hit W for move, and I can move this down a bit so that, there we go, we got a floor. And then, of course, I can go back to shading, and there we've got a floor now. Now, in this case, I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to maybe put like a new material on that. Let's call this ground. There we go. And of course, we can play with some of the settings either through here, because these are the same controls. I don't probably want that white, so maybe I'll kind of give it a slightly brownish color. Definitely don't want it reflecting, so we'll kind of just bring these all down a bit. There we go. And now we're starting to kind of ready to see the rendering here, right? And this is where, instead of using Eevee, what we can do is we can click on this to do a full render. Now, in this case, one of the things we need to consider is that this little kind of box right here, right? Remember, there's the little wrench and screwdriver, and right below that's what looks like a briefcase microwave. Right now, it's using Eevee as the rendering engine, so we want to switch that to Cycles, because that's the full-blown rendering engine, right? Now, in this case, I'm also going to make sure I think my lights are all on. You see how the camera lights are turned off, so I'm going to turn that on. Remember, I kind of put those in there. You need to make sure your light's on. And now with a light, you can actually see it showing up and working, right? Now, here's the thing, though. It's pretty dark, right? So one of the things we really are going to start to need to do is to give this kind of an environment background. Let me kind of see if I can remember exactly where that's at right now. I'm trying to remember. Let's see here. I remember that. I've done this before. It's pretty straightforward, usually. Just got to remember where it's actually at. Ah, there we go. All right. Let's see. I think this is it. Might be here. All right. I think it is right here. I'm going to save this though really quick. So if we go to kind of the, I believe the red kind of globe here, we should be able to click on background, and you'll see that it actually has some different shaders. Where's the environment one? Let's see, it should be in here. Maybe it's not this one. Background. No. It's a color. Might be color. There we go. All right. So we can actually go to color, I think. And let's see, environment texture. There we go. I've done this only a few times, right? I'm quite good with a lot of stuff in Blender, guys, but there's certain parts that I'm still, since I'm newer to Blender, still learning. But remember, you go to this little kind of magenta-ish, reddish globe, click on color, pick environment texture from those options. And then what you'll see is we should be able to go to new here, I think, or open. Let me see here. Let's see. New. Nope. Okay. Maybe this isn't what I wanted. Let's see here. All right. I might have to come back to this because I'm kind of getting a little bit. All right. This is not where we wanted it. Let's see. There should be. Should be able to see an environment shader there. Oh, maybe it was further down. Nope. Gosh darn it. All right. I'm blanking on when this is at right now. Because there's actually some great shaders that you can actually use for your material backgrounds that simulate environment light. I am just blanking on where the heck this is at. Shoot, we might have to come back to this as I refresh myself on where these controls are at. Let's see here. Don't think it was background scene. Nope. Okay. Might have been up in the rendering here. Nope. I don't think it was in here either. Alright, so this is one of those things where I'm going to have to kind of come back to it, guys, because right now it's kind of, I just have to refresh myself on where that's at. I feel like we're on the right track here, though. It's not... Let's see here. I feel like it's in this area. I'm just not seeing the controls I want for it. Let's click on this and see. Environment texture. Oh, good lord. Okay, there we go. Actually, I was on the right track. I just put environment texture in instead of sky. I believe it's sky. There we go. All right, good. I found it. Obviously, guys, I just, like I said, there's certain parts where like I just haven't used it as much quite yet. In fact, this newer Nishida one, I think, is newer. Only works in here. But you see how it actually gives us an environment background. So it is the kind of red globe. It is the color. Just instead of picking environment texture, pick sky texture, because that's what we wanted to create was a sky, right? So now we could actually start to see, particularly with this setup as our renderer, and with cycles on, we actually get this environment background. Now the cool thing is you can actually play with the sun elevation, right, to simulate different kind of elevations for it, right? You can play around with sun rotation, right? And you can even play with things like altitude. So there's a lot of really, really neat controls that you can actually play with to give you different results. Like we said, as we keep going with sun elevation, you see I can get it to kind of noon. And if you kind of turn it down quite low, you see how you get sunset. And you can actually get quite dark sunset to the point of nighttime. So you can actually see here that the sky texture is quite cool for giving you kind of a neat rendered background. And if you have other objects in here, you can see the ray tracing more. You might even turn the bump nodes down a little bit. So you can always kind of do a little bit of fine tuning once you kind of get your render viewport shading up. So yeah, so these are some of the cool things you could actually do, right? In this case, I think we'll probably stop there for today, and we'll just kind of do a final rendering kind of video for you guys later this week. But remember, it is kind of the rendering nodes here, so you can kind of start to do that. But for now, I think this will work pretty well for us to get you guys just about done, right? So we'll probably have one more like really, really short lecture, like a couple minutes just on kind of getting the final render. But this will get you to a point where you now know where you can go to get your sky texture. And there's actually a couple of different types, right? So you can actually play with some different ones that have some are a little simpler. The Nishida one, though, really seems to be the kind of super awesome one, right? You have tons of controls here. You can start to see kind of the reflection of surface around you. In this case, it's kind of a boring environment. So that's kind of one of those things as you play around with it, you can kind of get some other stuff going on. But yeah, so just kind of a little bit of those last little things I just wanted to kind of talk to you guys about so that you can start to get your, I think I want it to be a little bit more sunny day. And we can make the sun more intense, right? So you'll see how this can do a really good job of simulating an outdoor environment for you, right? To get your final render looking pretty cool. So believe it or not, there is an actual neat sky texture, just like you guys kind of remember from last year Maya had. So it's there. You can kind of play with some of these different controls to adjust it to your liking. I'd probably go with a bit more of a kind of a normal brighter day look, just so we get a little more light in there, right? All right. So like I said, I think that'll probably be a great place to stop for today. All right, let's stop the video.